Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Spanish-style hot chocolate. That's right, if you've only had hot chocolate made from a powdered mix, you are in for a big treat, since this is so much thicker and richer and more decadent. But therein lies the challenge, since we really do still want this to be a drink, and not like some kind of liquefied chocolate bar. But I feel like I've come up with the perfect formula. And yes, that is cayenne on the top. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the most important ingredient, some high quality, hopefully dark chocolate, which we're going to want to break up or cut up into smaller pieces. And in case you're keeping score at home, I'm using a bittersweet chocolate that was 70% cacao. But if you did want to use something less intense, that's fine. I mean, you guys are after all the Salvador Dalis of these Spanish hot chocolate follies. But for me, since this drink is so rich and decadent, I do not want it to be too sweet. But anyway, we'll go ahead and break that up, and then we'll set it aside, and we'll move on to the rest of the ingredients, which will include some nice fresh whole milk, which in the history of food wishes, I've never managed to pour into a saucepan without spilling it or dripping it. So you are in fact witnessing history. And then to that, because I am using bittersweet chocolate, I'm going to add a little touch of white sugar, which if you're using something like semi-sweet chocolate, you might not need. So you'll have to adjust that to taste. And then we'll definitely also want to do a little pinch of salt, followed by a very small amount of a hugely important ingredient, and that would be some cornstarch. And once that's in, we'll give this a thorough whisking. And I'm only using a half a teaspoon because I am doing the thinner drinkable version. Okay, the other version of Spanish hot chocolate is the thick version we use as a dip, typically for something like churros, which I'll actually give you a look at later. And for the thicker version, we'd use twice as much cornstarch. But for this, we only need a little bit, as you will see. But anyway, once that's mixed in, we'll head to the stove, where we will place this over medium-high heat. And what we'll do is wait, stirring occasionally, until the milk just starts to simmer. Oh, and I should mention, I'm using medium-high heat because I'm using a nice heavy-duty saucepan. All right, if you're using a cheap thin pan, you're going to have to keep your heat on medium. Otherwise, that milk might scorch onto the bottom, which is not going to be good. And as I mentioned, what we're waiting for here is this to just barely start to simmer, which is not super easy to see. Right? Because we're whisking this hot milk that contains that little bit of cornstarch, we are definitely going to get some foam on top that makes it a little tougher to see what's going on. But once we see things getting kind of steamy, and that foam kind of starts to dance a little bit on the surface, we will know we're just about there. And in fact, to demonstrate this a little better, I'm going to let this go a little bit too long, so that you can see in this shot how that foam will actually sort of start rising up. Right, you see that in the back? Okay, that means this has started to simmer, which means we have to give it a whisk and pull it off the heat. And then very quickly but safely, dump in all our chocolate, and then mix until it's completely melted and incorporated. So that's exactly what I did. And by the way, this is one of those things that does not look good until it does. And then it looks really good. So don't get nervous as you start whisking. In fact, you know what? When you're cooking, just never get nervous. But anyway, the point is just keep whisking, and eventually all that chocolate will be emulsified in. And if everything goes according to plan, it will hopefully look like this. So let me go ahead and grab a spoon so you can get a better look at what we call in the business the viscosity. And while we definitely want a little bit of thickness, this has to be thin enough to be sippable. Okay, if you can't sip it, it's not a drink, it's a sauce. Which again is great if you're going to dip things in it. But if we're going to drink it out of a cup, I do not think it should be any thicker than this. Oh, and then two things you definitely don't want to do. Transfer this into a cold cup, which I did. And then wait for like 10 minutes to drink it, because you're taking pictures. And the reason I mention that is that this is going to look a lot thicker than it really will be. Okay, you absolutely want to serve this piping hot. The second that chocolate has been whisked in, with ideally a little bit of cayenne sprinkled over the top. And then as far as what to serve this with, for me there's only one choice. And no, it's not churros. It's with lightly buttered, toasted sourdough, which to me is an absolutely perfect pairing with that rich, decadent chocolate drink, which, by the way, even enjoyed alone, is fantastic. But as you may already know, bread and chocolate is one of the greatest combinations ever invented. So if you can find some nice sourdough, even if you have to make it yourself, this is very, very highly recommended. Okay, for me, churros are a little too rich and sweet for this. But having said that, I do love dipping churros in the thicker version of this, which I'm going to give you a peek at the end of the video. But like I said, for enjoying a nice steaming hot cup of this, I will take toasted or grilled sourdough anytime. Oh, and even though it was a very small amount, and we would have gotten an almost identical texture without it, that little touch of cornstarch really is key here, since it ever so slightly changes the texture on the palate to what I would describe as something more luxurious. Right, maybe smoother or silkier is a better word. So while it might seem fairly insignificant, it's not. And it really does help give this its signature mouthfeel. So as far as the classic drinkable hot chocolate version goes, I think this has the perfect proportions of chocolate and cornstarch. But if you did want to do the thicker version, because you want to dip some churros in it, that would be done with the exact same procedure, except we double the amount of cornstarch, plus we whisk in a little more chocolate. Okay, my rule of thumb for the drinkable version is about 2 ounces of dark chocolate per cup of milk. But if you're into doing the thicker dippable version, I usually increase that to 3 ounces per cup, which is exactly what this version had. And we will definitely give those adjustments on the written recipe. And yes, believe it or not, that little touch of cayenne really does work beautifully. But whether you are going to make this thicker version, because you think eating churros without dipping them in a thick, Spanish-style hot chocolate is a crime against nature, or you are going to make the thinner, drinkable version we showed in this video, either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.